I can fix this. Welcome back to my shop. Today's video is going to be a little different than my previous ones because I won't be actually building anything like I usually do. Instead, I will use this TV tray that I made last time and will 1. Fix up those legs a bit so they don't look so out of place, and 2. Show a method for making finished surfaces super smooth without using any additional grain fillers, which can sometimes stick out because they don't always match the color of the wood. And the main reason I decided to make a separate video talking about this is because it's pretty neat, and I surprisingly haven't been able to find too many other people talk about it on YouTube, so I felt like it deserved its own video rather than being a footnote in a larger project. Because the finish is always the last step, I will first focus on fixing the legs, and then we'll do the finishing method after. So if you're here because of the title and because you're interested in that process, then feel free to skip ahead to this time. The first thing that I had to do was remove the poly from the edges because I had this random idea that paint will be able to fix all of my problems. So now I have to make sure that the paint will actually stick to the surface. My main issue that I'm trying to fix is I managed to hide that the top is made from plywood by using miter joints. But then when you look at the legs, they clearly give it away. If I can just paint the edges, maybe I can maintain the illusion that it's made out of higher quality wood. When I was done sanding off all the edges, I wiped away the dust and then grabbed a sample paint that I had. It's red, so I felt like it would go nicely with the yellow undertone of the wood. So I just went at it. And I actually kept going back and forth about what the best way to do this was. At first, I decided I didn't need to tape the sides and that I would just be really careful. But after a couple of spills where I went over the edge by like a lot, I decided that maybe taping was the right way to go. So I went around the other edge to see if that helps, because taping inside around all the gear required a little more patience than I had. So I may have kind of half-assed this. But it worked out fine. When I got to the swing of it, I actually didn't even need any tape at all. I was able to just carefully push the paint to the edge with the brush and then get all the way across without spilling any on the sides. After I was done with every edge where you could see the plywood cross sections, I waited until it dried a bit and then just sanded off any paint that spilled over. Since we'll be adding more finish to the tray, there's no need to worry about sanding off too much. Also, I made a mistake of not waiting long enough at first, and I just ended up smearing the paint with my sandpaper, so don't be like me. Let it dry a bit first. Okay, now for the fun stuff. So the method I'll be using is inspired by a book called The Furniture Bible, which is one of the go-to books for furniture makers. And in the book, the author uses tung oil instead of poly, so he calls the method tung oil buildup. But I found that using the same application for poly works just as well, so that's what I'll be using for this project. You start off by putting 1 or 2 regular coats of the finish on your surface, like you normally would, and then letting them cure completely. So I already have those ready to go from my previous video. Then, for the third coat, you put on a very thin layer of your finish, and then immediately, while it's still wet, start sanding it in little circular motions with very fine sandpaper. I use 1000 grit, but you can go even higher if you want. And at first, you'll feel a little resistance because there will be texture, but as you keep going, you'll feel the surface get smoother. The point is that you want to create this slurry that's a mixture of wet finish and dry finish and wood particles all mixed together. And then when you finish sanding the entire surface, while the mixture is still wet, you take an old credit card, or in my case, a plastic razor, and you scrape that slurry across the surface. You want to do this across the wood grain, not along it, because you want to work this mixture into the grain like a filler. I did this to the top and then also obviously to the sides. Then you want to buff the surface to get rid of any unevenness. But you want to do this in the sweet spot when the finish is fully dry but not fully cured. And in case you don't know the difference, because I think a lot of people use these synonymously, if you ever put on a finish and then after 24 hours notice that it feels completely dry, but it still gives off a smell, that's because it's fully dry, but it hasn't been fully cured yet. When it's cured, you shouldn't be able to smell the finish at all. So you want to buff this after 24 hours, but no later than 3 days. You don't want to use anything too aggressive or it will take off the finish and undo all of your work. So I mainly relied on buffing pads. I started off with 1000 grit sandpaper first, but then moved up to buffing pads and then finished off with a burlap cloth, or you can also use steel wool. And in the end, this is what you're left with. Like I said in the beginning, this is construction grade plywood, so it's not meant to be finished into such a smooth surface, but I was still able to get a pretty glassy finish. If you lean in really close, you can definitely see the texture of the wood, but if you run your hand across it, it feels like you are touching glass. The more times you repeat this process, the smoother you'll be able to get the surface. In the book, I think the guy did it 8 times, and my friend used the same method about 3 times and got the smoothest surface for his end table. I did it just once because I was worried if it was too smooth that I wouldn't be able to put a glass on it without it sliding off when I moved. But I also did want it to be smooth enough where I could write on it without the texture from the wood getting imprinted onto the paper. So I feel like one layer did exactly what I needed it to do. This is how it looks finished, with its little painted legs. I do think they kind of saved it. The color does hide the pain points that were bothering me and also makes it fit in with the place a little better. So I definitely like it better than it was before. But I'm also curious to know what you guys think. Does this fix it? Does it make it more obvious that I'm trying to hide something? And another option that I considered was just changing out the legs entirely and using different material like maybe oak. So would that have been better? But in any case, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching me run around my shop, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.